the first time in our history, right, that we've got 4 generations working together in the work environment. You've got baby boomers who are on the tail end of their career, right? You've got Gen Xers like me who are, 20 years, 25 years into their career. We've got millennials and we've got Gen Z. And each generation, which I find completely fascinating, we all have a different approach to work.
My guest today, Julie Cropp Gareleck, has driven millions of dollars in revenue for her clients as CEO of her own business, Junction Creative, which supports small to mid-sized businesses as well as the Fortune 1000. Her journey, going from teenage waitress to corporate America to eventually taking the brave step to start her own company 15 years ago without capital or a Harvard MBA, has taken a kind of grit and determination you only read about, which is why, thankfully, she has written her first book, Dare to Become, which we will be talking about in depth today. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hello, and welcome to the Write the Book Inside You podcast. Tips, tools, and interviews for coaches and healers like you who want to write a non-fiction book to boost your visibility, clients, and cash flow while making a difference. I'm your host, Carol Westmore, a multi-published author and energy psychology tapping book coach. Now let's jump into today's episode. So, Julie, your inspiring journey from teenage waitress to entrepreneur taught you a lot about life and business and money, which all comes up in your book. But throughout it, I'm going to ask you to start with the saying, which you probably want people to take away from your book. What is it?
Yes. From a young age, when I was a teenager, I developed a mantra that's I'm fine, it's all going to be fine. And it is.
Throughout the book, you kind of repeat it, don't you? Even when you went through some harrowing and challenging times. Who's the reader that you hope to touch with your book?
Absolutely. So, this really is a story about my journey from working for my parents' restaurant to becoming a CEO and now author. And, I really do feel like it appeals to those folks who, maybe they are a freelancer, maybe they are thinking of starting their own business, or maybe they're in a corporate career and they're looking for inspiration to grow in that field. I do feel that the foundations that I talk about in the book can apply to all of those individuals who are really becoming the CEO of their own career.
Okay, and why is it so important today? Would you say every person has a dream to work for themselves and to run their own show? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I will say, we're so lucky that we live in an environment now where, becoming an entrepreneur or starting a business is favored. It's definitely a path that a lot of people want to follow. And for those of us, here, it's the American dream, right? Of being able to build and work for yourself. And I do think it's important as people are starting those businesses to really understand what it takes to be successful. It isn't the sound bites that we hear on TikTok, the $100 million startup, the $100,000 side hustle. Those are all ads that are targeting us to clickbait or click into an offer that's coming. But when it really comes down to building a business, whether you're a solopreneur or whether you have employees, the journey is a little bit more difficult than just setting up, the business and starting to take on clients.
And could you take us back to maybe an absolute pivotal moment when this came home to you at one point in your career?
There have been so many experiences that I've had that have been what I would call catalysts for change. So moments, I can go all the way back to when I was in, junior high, and I had a guidance counselor who, when I told her I wanted to be a dancer and a writer, that I needed to pick a more sustainable career path. But that didn't stop me from pursuing journalism and communications in college. And then when I got to college, having an advisor that said that I would never get accepted to an Ivy League international program because my grades weren't good enough. And in fact, I got into the program. As I started my career and I was met with adverse situations or toxic work environments, I could have let that stop me as well. But I feel like all of these instances were all catalysts for pushing me down a path toward where I am now. And so I can't say that there's just one, but I can say that what I've learned is that it's a lot of these little moments of adversity that really are what have propelled me down the path that I'm on now.
Well, one of the things that really came home for me was talking about money. You have a very grounded way of saying, the money on the page is more important than the money of your projected income. And I'd like you to talk a bit more about that, how you discovered that.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, from a financial perspective, that's going to be one of the best gifts you can give yourself is what I like to call just financial literacy, like understanding not just how to put a projection together on a spreadsheet, but understand what it takes to actually put those numbers on the page. And a lot of times, and I've seen this with clients, with people I've consulted with 20 years ago, where they have these unbelievable projections of, oh, I'm going to make $1 million in the first year. They put together a really great Excel spreadsheet, but they don't necessarily think through how they're going to execute that to put those numbers on that same spreadsheet. And so when I started my business, I, definitely was bootstrapping with my savings. I treated every dollar as if it was my last dollar. And I will tell you that 15 years later, I still know where every dollar goes in my business. I'm always looking for ways to optimize the revenue that we have, also optimize the expenses that we have. And one of the other things that I do that I talk about in the book is how even though my business has grown and has become, a very successful business, I still pay myself a very meager salary. And I do this because it really keeps me hustling and it keeps me honest. A lot of times folks will go into business thinking, hey, I want to make $100,000 a year. I want to make $200,000 a year. And then they hit a rough patch in the business and they can't afford payroll. So I've always just challenged myself to live within my means. And even though I take the lion's share of profit at the end of the year because I'm a sole owner, I still keep myself honest every month to myself, to my employees, so that I never put the business in a financial situation where I can't afford payroll or I can't afford to pay for the things that we need to for the business.
So what do you do day to day to keep current? How do we stay ahead of the game when it comes to finances?
The first thing you need to do is you need to find someone that you can trust and then verify, verify, verify. So I have an accounting manager that I've worked with for years. She and I meet monthly to go over the numbers. And then I also check the bank accounts, credit card accounts, probably 2 to 3 times per week to make sure that there aren't any charges that shouldn't be there. I also make sure that, when income is coming in, that I'm reconciling that in the account. So I will tell you, it isn't a set and forget it. And even though I do have an accounting manager who's fantastic, I'm also logging in to verify the numbers as well to make sure that I have not missed anything.
And there's one thing I read that you do tell new people, and they ask you over and over again, what do I need to be an entrepreneur and start my own business? You do say that. Do you want to share with us what you tell them when it comes to money?
When it comes to money, right, you really have to understand the value of a dollar. You have to understand how to earn the money. And that's sort of one of the biggest themes that I talk about is that, and if you do decide to take money from an investor or a third party, you really do need to treat every dollar as if it's your last. If you don't, you will lose sight of
which you learned. Tell us a bit more as a waitress. I think you have some very interesting insights of.
Absolutely. So I will say that one of the biggest motivators for writing Dare to Become was really the experience that I had working for my parents' family restaurant, the Avenue Restaurant in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. They were longtime corporate folks, right? My father worked for a corporation for more than 20 years. My mother worked for the bank. They were not, by all intents and purposes, they didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. They really grew into it. And as they progressed in their careers, they decided to take a leap of faith and invest in themselves. And they invested in a restaurant, one which I love to tell the story my father had never eaten in prior to buying it. I had, of course. It really was a real life MBA, so to say. As their daughters, my sister and I, we weren't treated as children. I mean, we were treated as though we were a part of the organization and that, we had to carry responsibility. We were accountable for our actions. And our parents taught us absolutely everything, whether it was being a dishwasher and washing dishes on a busy Sunday morning, or peeling 100 pounds of potatoes, or as you mentioned earlier, scrubbing the grout lines on the tile floor with a toothbrush. I've done it all. But I will say it was in those lessons that I learned just what it took to piece together this business. It wasn't just that they showed up every day and worked. It was that they consistently executed against their goals to build that restaurant. And I got to see, everything from ordering to hiring to firing to managing people. And the most important thing that I took from that experience is that I learned from the customers that I served and learning how to speak to people, learning how to engage with other people. It really was the foundation for my work ethic. And, coming out of college, I felt like I was 10 years ahead of other people my age because I'd already sweat out the 50-hour work weeks or 60-hour work weeks. So when I went to go work my first job in Philadelphia, not only did I make $12,000 less or something like that, I also worked less than I did when I worked with a family business.
I think I was referring to you. You say that you tell entrepreneurs is to take a minimum of 18 to 24 months to get a business launched and to become profitable. Set that as the expectation. Starting a business is hard enough without carrying the emotional weight of missed expectations. So is this where you have to really...
The rubber meets the road? Yeah,
the rubber meets the road when it comes to your expectations. And you've had some people you've worked with who had expectations beyond what they were giving to your company or to the companies you worked for. How does that work? How can we balance that with our dreams and our expectations, keeping them real?
Absolutely. I think it's just that, right? You can have a dream, you can have a big picture, like this is what I want for my life, right? But you have to align the expectation with that. If you look at some of the most successful people in the world, they didn't get there by waking up and becoming successful overnight, right? It really truly is a product of how hard you work. It's also a product of setting the right expectation. And I do talk about this in many chapters, which is when the expectations are misaligned, that's where you run into trouble. So when I started my business, I naively thought, well, hey, in a year, I'll have replaced my income that I had prior to starting my company. And what I realized was I was so focused on that 12 months that it didn't really happen until month 18. And had I set that expectation up front, it would have saved me 6 months of feeling like a failure, feeling like I wasn't hitting the mark. But I do think that the sound bites that we hear make us think that it's so attainable so quickly. And so you have to set realistic expectations. Set the reach goal too, by the way. Don't just set the realistic one, but set realistic expectations and develop a path to get there, and then set the reach goal, because sometimes you will hit the reach goal right ahead of schedule. But, even when it comes to, hiring people in the workplace too, a lot of times their expectation is that the job or the company is there to meet their expectation. And I like to say to folks too that the jobs that we create are really to meet the demands of the business. Now, while we can accommodate preferences and expectations, we can do that. But to come into an organization with your own expectations without understanding what the business needs from you, I think that's going to set you up for failure as well if you don't take a look at that.
If there was one piece of advice, that the best piece of advice you've ever been given, what might it be? And that can be about life or business. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
I've been so fortunate to work with so many mentors who've taught me so many things, but there's one thing that I have taken away from this entire journey, and this is what I would tell people. It's in the rising and the falling that we evolve. We evolve as humans, we evolve as entrepreneurs, we evolve as the best version of ourselves. And so remember that when you are in the rising, that there will be falling. When you're in the falling, there will be rising, and to take those experiences and let them fuel the next step
And
forward.
now for a word from our episode sponsor. Every writer has faced the dreaded writer's block. But what if you had not just one, but 7 ways to shatter it? Introducing Bust Writer's Block Forever, 7 game-changing ways to kiss writer's block goodbye and unleash creative inspiration. Dive deep into transformative processes, the work of Byron Katie, Havening, EFT tapping, the journey, the alter ego effect for writers, internal family systems. And as a special treat, a bonus chapter on collaborating, even dancing with ChatGPT, your new creative catalyst. For those who've been inspired by The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, this book and accompanying video course at bustwritersblock.com will feel like coming home. Dive in at bustwritersblock.com. Now back to today's episode.
Turning to writing your book, you said that was, if you call, a reach goal from when you were a child. So that's taken you many years to write.
Yeah.
But is that because you eventually realized you had a story? Or what was the catalyst that made you want to sit down and write this book?
That's a great question. When I reached 13 years in business, I had attained some goals, right? I'd reached some goals that I was really excited to hit. And I found myself caught off guard. I wasn't prepared for the next goal. And I sort of was not floundering, but just really trying to find inspiration to get to that next level, because getting to this level was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for books. I was looking for blogs, for podcasts, for something that could make me just feel like I was going to be all right. And I started reading back through journals that I've kept since I was a young girl. And I literally read through 30 years or more of just journal entries about my journey from working for my parents to building my career to becoming a business owner. And as I read through those journal entries, I was struck by how fearless I was as a 20-something with these big eyes and a big dream. And I realized that I'd forgotten along the way to appreciate what I've done and how far I've come. And so it really was what led me to literally put pen to paper and start writing the story, because I'm not from big money. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't have, institutional investment when I started my business. I'm just like a lot of people that are out there wanting to follow their dreams. And I wanted to share my story. I wanted to share some of these lessons that I had learned along the way. So in the hopes of maybe inspiring someone else along their path.
And I think you do that very well. And I like to hear, as many people who are listening to this podcast write the book inside you, it's interesting, you don't say it anywhere else. It's the first time I've actually realized you did keep a journal, and you're happy now that you did, because, and I must say, reading into your book, there were some monsters that you came across in your heroine's journey, for sure, especially in corporate America. And even after you've started your business, people insinuating that it was just a hobby for you.
Correct.
But to go back to corporate America, there were some very ugly characters and ways you were treated, which
Correct.
you came through, but which have influenced you to be a different person as running your own company. Could you reflect on that?
Absolutely. When I started Junction, I really wanted to create an environment that was reflective of the type of environment I wanted to work in. And while, not every experience that I've had has been bad, I really came through some very toxic environments that challenged me emotionally, right? Challenged me physically. And I didn't want to become what I had experienced. And so as I built Junction and as I set out to start my own company, I have some very hard and fast rules that, we all live by. And, there's no ego in my business from top down. There isn't one person on the team, including myself, that's better than anyone else. We're kind to each other. We work hard. So anyone that's worked for me knows, it's not like we're all sitting around, chatting all the time. We all work really hard, but we all respect each other for the contributions that we bring to the table. And I do feel like having gone through some of those environments and being faced with situations that I would never want my own child to go through, or a friend or a colleague to experience, my only hope is that I can be the change that I wanted to see and didn't find in those environments.
So I believe you've got twin daughters.
I do.
Tell us how you would coach them within their life, and whether reading your book would in some way instill in them some of your values.
Yeah. My husband and I are both, even now, as our daughters they're 9. But, we've instilled this concept of hard work, and that you really can get to where you want to go as long as you work really hard. And I would do what my parents did for me when I was faced with these challenges and successes. They were always a sounding board. They were never judging me for decisions. They were supportive. And so I can only hope that as my children grow and enter into the workforce, or whether they start companies, that I can be supportive and provide them with advice on how to solve the problem or how to deal with the situation. And certainly to make sure that they understand that there's always a safe place for them as they go through that. So, I mean, those are the things, and we're not easy on them. They have chores now, and they know how to earn money. They have to save for things. So I will say the very same lessons my parents taught me all those years ago, I'm definitely transferring that on to my children.
Yeah, well done. And talking of family, you mentioned an interesting factor about running a workforce with what you call a multi-generational employees, and just go run through them. I mean, even I got confused.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
The first time in our history, right, that we've put 4 generations working together in the work environment. You've got baby boomers who are on the tail end of their career, right? You've got Gen Xers like me who are, 20 years, 25 years into their career. We've got millennials, and we've got Gen Z. And each generation, which I find completely fascinating, we all have a different approach to work, right? So if I look at the baby boomers, they grew up without technology. They started their careers without a computer, without Microsoft Office, without any of these tools that we now have to make our jobs easier. And there's so much that we can learn from that generation, because when they started their careers, they really had to roll up their sleeves and get it done without a lot of assistance from Google, right? They had to
AI. Let's not look at forget the elephant in the room. AI.
Yeah.
So move on to the others, and to compare it.
Gen X, which is my generation, and I will say to you, we had technology, but we didn't have it until we were in college, right? Or until we were entering the workforce. I didn't get my first phone until I was 22. Twitter didn't come out until I was 26, I believe. So, we're kind of that generation that learned from boomers. So we follow a specific path, but then we're still adapting to the technology as it comes. So sometimes it feels like a bit of just exhaustion, just trying to keep up with 20 different versions of Microsoft since it came out.
Yeah.
And then with millennials and Gen Z, they grew up with technology. So I find it fascinating that I learn different tips or tricks from my employees who are like, no, you can go here, and there's this tool, and this automates this. And so we're all kind of blending together, but I do think that one of the challenges I see a lot of companies face is blending those generations together. I feel like sometimes we listen to the loudest group, right, in the room, and we listen to their preferences and what they want, but we really need to listen to all of those generations, because without them, we lose a lot of experience. We lose a lot of learning. And so I find it fascinating. I happen to love it. But I do see that companies struggle with figuring out how to balance it and how to get those generations to work together.
Yes. I mean, there's this one story that comes to mind of someone coming to work and sharing with you, her CEO, a private, how she'd spent the night and only, came back to work at, or left her boyfriend's house at whatever. And it was, you were thinking, is this the kind of information we would share? But in that generation, they do. They're quite open about it. Yeah.
And it was hard because, I'm all about sharing, like, oh, we did this weekend, but it had crossed into an area where, as if I put my CEO or my HR hat on, it like completely blurs the line between someone who's running a company and running a business and somebody who's sharing their personal dating life in a way that's uncomfortable, not just for me, but other people in the office as well, who might even be part of that same generation. So it is hard sometimes to establish those boundaries because the younger generations are just more forthcoming with
Yes,
a lot of information.
blurting it all out. So let's go back to writing your book in the time we have left, because that always interests me. So you had the journals. How did you carve out time? Because even okay, I am asking you about your book, but I'm also asking you about something which you say is a bit of a misnomer, and that is work-life balance. So, okay, let's start with that, and then let's end with how you then brought that to writing your book. How do you keep your work-life balance? How do you keep your sanity, your health? What is your secret sauce?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is there is no ideal work-life balance. There is no unicorn that you figure it out. If you're focusing on one area of your life over another, that someone is always like they're lower on the priority. For me, once I became a mom, I really set boundaries for myself in that I end the day at the same time every day. I have healthy habits. I work out, right? I find time to take 10 minutes when I start each day to really set my intention for the day. Sometimes I'll journal as well to really reflect on things that I'm grateful for, not the things that I'm struggling with, but things that I'm grateful for. And I think sometimes that mental preparation before a day can really help set you on the right path. And obviously, when I started writing the book, I was still and am still running my company. So I was, in a sense, taking on another big project. But I hired a book coach who I needed because I needed someone to give me deadlines, right? So even though I'm self-motivated, I need a deadline. And so Rick Wolf was the book coach that I was so fortunate to work with. And he set me up on a schedule. He said, all right, Julie, when can you get me pages? And I said, well, Tuesdays are good because Tuesdays my girls have after school, whether it was theater or tennis. And so I knew that they would be preoccupied with that. So I'm like, hey, Tuesdays are good. And then I looked at my schedule and said, all right, Thursday nights and Sunday afternoons are great days where I can carve out so many hours to write. And so I wrote on Thursdays. I wrote on Sundays. I met with Rick on Tuesdays to get the edits to my chapter, and I was able to write the book in 6 months. So he kept me on time, on task, and we kept it moving forward. But I had to set that boundary so that I could compartmentalize and focus to get those pages written, to get them, submitted on time.
And did you write them linearly, or did you take different aspects and then later put it together for your first draft?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, we started with an outline, right? We started with all of the key themes that I wanted to cover in the book. And then we really started at the beginning. Originally, when we were starting in the beginning, telling the foundation of my background and my story, that was really an exercise to get me into the flow of writing. And in the process, that's actually what set up the journey. And so we talk about, we wanted to tell a full circle story, right? Which is we start with, when I was 16 and we end with, how do you exit a business so that our readers or my readers can see like, hey, start to finish, what does it really take? Or what are the key steps that happen? I didn't want to leave readers with like, well, okay, well, what did you do then? What happens then?
Yeah.
It sort of organically started to fit together.
I like talking about coming full circle. In your acknowledgements, you go right back to the little girl who wanted to write. But before that, you just triggered something that I did pick up in your book towards the end about an exit strategy. Could you explain that to people? Because I'll tell you why I'm interested is I've just discovered that if you run a book writing business that's profitable on Amazon, maybe elsewhere, and it's it has a value, you can sell it. I didn't know that. I didn't know people had sold their book writing businesses for quite sizable six figures because they'd obviously, well, I don't know the ins and outs, but could you tell me what this thing called an exit strategy? means.
Absolutely. When you start a business, always have the exit in mind. Don't just start a business and think, hey, I'm going to run this business. Put together some plans for, do you want to be out in 5 years? Do you want to be out in 10 years? And then build towards that exit. And what I mean by that is as you're building, let's say your book writing business, take a look at where the revenue is coming from. Do you have a healthy profit margin? I will say this is the one thing that people are always surprised at when they go to sell and they realize that they're not prepared. So for example, in my space, in the agency space, when investors are looking at your agency, they want to see profitability above 20%. The reality is most agencies hover between 10 and 15. So in order to really get on their radar, you really have to be over that 20% threshold because as an investor, whether it's a single investor or an institutional investor, they want quality returns, right? So they want to make more money on your business over time than they would if they were putting their money in the stock market. So as you're putting your exit strategy together, is your revenue recurring, right? Or are you having to continue to replace it every year? If there is recurring revenue, that's fantastic. So these are all things that go into thinking about the exit. And I always say to folks too that it is your business. It's your baby. It's what you've built. And not every investor is going to see it from your perspective. But if your financials are strong and you can tell a really good story around profitability and how they're going to make money and how they can continue to make money when you're gone, that's going to set you up for quality conversations as you look to exit the business.
Well, that's interesting. And I'm sure it gives us a lot of food for thought. And
Yes.
Thank you so much. Now, could you tell us where people can find you and the book?
So my website, juliecroppgareleck.com, all one word, that's where you can go to learn more about my book, my podcast, services that we provide. The book, Dare to Become From the Corner Booth to the Corner Office, is already available for pre-sale and will be on store shelves, whether it's Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, Hudson News, and virtually every, independent bookshop across the world. So you can just Google Dare to Become and find your best retailer if you have a bookshop that you love, or Amazon's always a great place to go to.
So, Julie, as we come to the end of our interview, do you have one single quote or thought that we could leave listeners with today?
Remember, as you start this journey, to invest in yourself, to invest in your future as a business owner or an entrepreneur. Remember that when you're faced with challenges, when you're faced with success, just remember that in the rising and the falling, that's when we evolve. And if you embrace it, you'll find the best version of yourself.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you for the interview, and I wish you all the best with going forward as a writer.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on today's podcast. Want a free gift to inspire you further on your book writing adventure? My free checklist, 5 book hook tips to kickstart your book writing journey, will help you get clarity on the key essentials to make your book a winner. Download it at writethebookinsideyou.com/free gift. The links are in the show notes. Until next time, a big virtual hug and keep writing.
And now for a word from our episode sponsor. Every writer has faced the dreaded writer's block. But what if you had not just one, but 7 ways to shatter it? Introducing Bust Writer's Block Forever, 7 game-changing ways to kiss writer's block goodbye and unleash creative inspiration. Dive deep into transformative processes, the work of Byron Katie, Havening, EFT tapping, the journey, the alter ego effect for writers, internal family systems. And as a special treat, a bonus chapter on collaborating, even dancing with ChatGPT, your new creative catalyst. For those who've been inspired by The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, this book and accompanying video course at bustwritersblock.com will feel like coming home. Dive in at bustwritersblock.com. Now back to today's episode.